Great, thanks very much. So I'm here to talk about the Time and Effort on Task Toolkit, which is part of a collaborative enhancement project funded by the QAA. And I'll just ask my collaborator, Christina, to come on briefly here and introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Christina Magkoufopoulou and I'm based at Coventry University, which is the lead institution of this collaborative project that is in collaboration with other four institutions and funded by QA, as Anna already mentioned. And back on to you, Anna.
Thanks, Christina. So I'm from the University of the West of Scotland, which is one of those institutions. And yeah, what we've created in this toolkit is essentially worksheet templates with associated guidance to support both staff and students. And we have versions of those worksheets which are for staff and versions for students. We've also conducted focus groups and interviews looking at the initial versions of our toolkit and used the feedback from those to help develop it further. So just a quick bit of evidence from our surveys. For our initial versions, we found that 85% of students and 84% of staff thought that they could make use of those initial versions of the toolkit, which we've since redeveloped further. Essentially, the toolkit supports 3 steps. The first step is establishing what prior knowledge and skills are going to be necessary to help tackle this particular assessment task. The second step is breaking the assessment task down into a set of sub-steps for each. The student and the member staff can think about the time and effort that would be required, not just overall, but for each of the sub-steps. The third step is to think about the alignment of the assessment task. For staff, that's thinking about things like constructive alignment, etc. And for students, it's thinking about how they can maximise success on the task. So what I'm going to do now is show you some kind of snapshots from the worksheet templates for each step of that process. So this is step 1. For the staff version, this is very much about communicating the demands of the assessment or the kind of prior knowledge and expectations of prior skills that would be necessary to attempt this assessment task. So staff are able to use this in assessment design, but also in communication with students about what prior knowledge and skills they have that would be useful. For students, it's more self-reflective questions where they're asked to think about how their knowledge, their prior skills are relevant, and also where there might be any gaps, and also thinking about where they can seek support for any of those gaps. In the second step, this is about breaking the assessment task down. So staff, for example, can think about and communicate how to break the task down. We've seen that in other talks today, but also think about the time on task for a typical student and think about the relevant resources that can be used to support the students at each sub-step. For students, they can think about their own individual circumstance and how much time, how much mental effort is likely to be needed for each of the sub-steps in the assessment task. They can think about target dates for completion. This was something that student data from focus groups really emphasised. And they can think about where they would seek support as well. So we have these steps at step 2 where it's all broken down, and this can be something that staff and student work together on collaboratively in a workshop setting, for example. In step 3, this is very much about a final checking process. So for staff, it's about checking for constructive alignment, making sure that the assessment demands are appropriate, for example, the learning outcomes and the credit weighting, for example. For students, it's about thinking about the final checks for maximising success and achieving a grade that they would be happy with. Things like checking the marking criteria, rechecking the assessment brief, and all that kind of thing. So this is the third step where the two versions of the worksheets deviate a little more from each other, but you can see examples of the questions there. Take-home messages then. So our staff data, when we did the focus groups, did kind of raise, some concerns about whether this kind of approach would increase student anxiety. But we think you have to evaluate that risk against the risk of not giving a complete kind of explanation or specification of the assessment tasks to the students. And if it's done in a supportive and collaborative way, that would work against any potential risk of anxiety. We very much recommend using the toolkit in that collaborative approach for co-creation of assessment plans for clear communication of assessment design. It's a flexible and free tool that will support a whole variety of different assessment types, and staff can use it for assessment design, for communicating the demands of their assessments, and students can use it for assessment planning. Thanks very much for listening.